A warning for listeners, I'm about to geek out about composting. Welcome to Food for Thought, the place to explore, celebrate, and manifest a life motivated and defined by unconditional compassion and optimal wellness. My name is Patrick-Goudreau. You can find me online on Instagram, Facebook, of course at my website, joyfulvegan.com. Be sure to subscribe to Food for Thought. You can do so at iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying this free listener-sponsored, listener-supported podcast called Food for Thought, I hope you share it with others and leave ratings and reviews. Word of mouth really is the best way to increase its listenership, and supporting it as a listener is the best way to keep it going. If you get anything out of this podcast at all, please go to patreon.com/ColleenPatrick-Goudreau to become a monthly supporter. Depending on the level you choose, you get perks. I'm adding perks all of the time. And of course, I'm adding content all of the time through this podcast, through social media, my blog, etc. And of course, I would very much appreciate your support. Again, this is listener-sponsored, listener-supported, and if you are a listener, please consider supporting the podcast. You can also go to joyfulvegan.com to make a one-time donation. Thank you so much in advance. Today's topic is Food Waste Part 3, Make Soil, Not Trash, the ins and outs of composting. This is whether you live in an apartment or a single family house, or if you live in the suburbs or in a rural area or an urban area. This is whether you have a garden or not. This is whether you garden or not. This is whether you have outdoor access or not. This is for everyone. You can, of course, listen to this episode on its own. It will be hopefully inspiring and informative for you, but I do think you'll get the most out of it if you listen within the larger context of food waste principles. Therefore, I encourage you to go back and listen to Food Waste Part 1 and Food Waste Part 2. I am thrilled beyond belief that the zero waste episodes, the series we're doing, it's not going to all be on zero waste, so don't worry. There's lots of great other great content coming, but especially the food waste series I have been doing, ending here with composting. I really didn't know it was going to be a 3-part series. I thought food waste was just going to be about composting, but as you can see, there's just so much to say about food waste, and I'm so thrilled that you're getting so much out of it. So please keep your questions and your comments coming. Leave your thoughts on the page for today's episode, or really on any related post at joyfulvegan.com. I love hearing from you. Also, while you're waiting for podcast episodes from me, you can enjoy daily social media posts, especially on Instagram, doing lots of stories over there. The blog posts I'm creating on this topic at joyfulvegan.com. There's lots on zero waste, lots on everything related to living compassionately and healthfully. I just did a blog post on my favorite zero waste shampoo and conditioner, because everyone's always interested in what I'm using for my hair. So you can go to joyfulvegan.com/hair and you can receive 15% off using the coupon code I provide there. So just go to that post in particular, or joyfulvegan.com/blog in general. I really encourage you to subscribe to the posts. On the column on the right-hand side, you will see it says don't miss a post, and you put your email address in, and that's different than joining our mailing list. This way you will get just an update every time there's a new post on the site. And that way you will not miss out on content that may inspire you, or announcements that may excite you, such as when my new book is coming out. I'm writing a book right now called The Joyful Vegan's Guide to Life in a Non-Vegan World. It is my 7th book, and I'm very excited about it. I also encourage you to subscribe to the mailing list at cpgvegantrips.com, or you could just go to cpgtrips.com. We've got some great trips planned, including a couple spots left for Rwanda, by the way. A couple people had to, unfortunately, because of some personal issues, they weren't able to make it after all. So I think we have a couple spots left for Rwanda, and we've got lots of exciting announcements coming up regarding more vegan trips. So go to cpgvegantrips.com to join that mailing list. And of course, I am so excited to see so many of you at the Compassion in Action conference here in Oakland in August. I'm not really sure there's going to be another one. It is so much work to put on a conference, as you can imagine. So if you are interested at all, don't wait for next year, come this year. And You can get a taste of the speakers who will be at the conference and speaking and sharing their wisdom if you're following me on Facebook or YouTube, because I've been hosting live video chats with each one of them leading up to the conference. So go to CompassionInActionConference.com and register today before the price increases and the spots fill up. You can also just go to joyfulvegan.com for all of this. Now enjoy this episode. And stay tuned for how you can win your very own compost bin. I am so excited. EnviroCycle, who is a company I've actually been we bought their compost bins about 15 years ago. We have loved their compost bins, and I'm so thrilled to be able to give you the opportunity to win. You being two of you, they're giving away 2 compost bins to lucky winners. And like I said, these are the same compost bins David and I have been using for 15 years, almost 15 years. And you can win as well. So stay tuned, listen up. So much information in this episode for you. I'm so excited. People are overwhelmed by what to do when it comes to composting. And that's what I love being able to do for you, is just give you the best of the best. You will get so many different opinions from composters about how to do it, how to go about it. So being able to distill it for you is a thrill for me. And I'm hoping you'll get as excited about composting as I am. And so here we go. At the end of Food Waste Part 2, I gave you a number of ideas for reducing food waste in the home, in the kitchen, because zero waste is not about waste diversion. It's about waste prevention. And I told you we would be tackling composting in Part 3 of the series on food waste. And so here we are. Now, as I said, when I first started thinking about this topic, I thought I would be doing one episode on composting veggie scraps, and that would be it. But as you can see, I've come to learn so much. And what I hope has been impressed upon you is that composting is the ultimate way to reduce food waste. And I don't mean ultimate as in awesome or the greatest. I mean it in the truest sense of the word, as in the last. It is the final frontier when all other options have been exhausted. Hence, applying what you've learned in parts 1 and 2. But it should not be the first line of defense. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is composting. But first, I want you to apply all the principles to reducing food waste at all. I've applied these principles and they work. It's really, really remarkable. The goal, I used to kind of think like, well, the more veggie scraps I have, the better, because it's just going to go into composting. Well, there's so much to do to actually reduce the amount of food scraps that we have, first of all, and also getting the most use out of them. That's what I find very exciting. Now, I said this is going to be for everyone wherever you live. David and I started composting when we lived in an apartment many, many years ago, even before the city of Oakland rolled out their green bins, allowing residents to send food scraps and yard waste to the city's composting program. Our city, we're very lucky. Oakland has a really, really robust composting program, and we have green bins that we can send all of our yard and green waste to. And yet I still compost at home. I really like being able to keep this closed loop, being able to bring food into my house that I then value, use up as much as possible in lots of different ways, and then compost in my own compost systems, so that I can take that compost and use it for my own garden. So even though I do take advantage of the green bin, especially for yard waste, and I do take advantage of it, and I'll tell you in other ways that I don't do here at my own house, even though I can. But the point is, we're very lucky, and I'm really grateful for that. We pay for it, but I'm really glad we have that option, and I hope that the rest of the city of Oakland residents are taking advantage of that. But we've been composting for a long time, and I really enjoy it. I'm not kidding when I say I get really excited about it. So over the years, of course, our composting has waxed and waned, and there was a time when we were killing it, and there was a time when we have failed. There was a time in our previous home, we had 17 fruit trees, and we had raised beds for a variety of vegetables. We gardened very regularly, and so we were composting we were doing a really good job composting. And then there have been times that we weren't doing it right and we needed to start from scratch. And then we moved and we had to kind of figure things out here. So I've got a lot to say about composting based on what I've learned, how we failed, what mistakes we made, how we got back on track, and how we keep things on track. So much to say. So David makes fun of me for getting very excited. But if you leave this episode with even a modicum of the enthusiasm I have for creating a circular economy, i.e. eliminating waste and maximizing the value of everything that gets created within your own life, in your own home, then I will be a happy camper. Now, remember, the reason we're even talking about this in the context of zero waste principles is because consumers throw up to 40% of the perfectly edible food they bring into their homes. And according to the Environmental Protection Agency, wasted food is the single biggest occupant in American landfills, adding more waste to landfills than any other product. And as a result, food buried in the airless confines of dumps, because we'll talk about the principles of composting. So just because you think something is compostable or biodegradable doesn't mean it's getting broken down, because you need certain conditions for it to break down. And in dumps, there are not those conditions. And as a result, methane is generated. Methane is a greenhouse gas 23 times as potent as carbon dioxide in trapping heat within our atmosphere. And this isn't just in the United States. Globally, food waste is responsible for an estimated 3.3 gigatons of greenhouse gas emissions. That's hard to say. Greenhouse gas emissions. Say it, try it. It's hard to say. So all of us, even vegans who may not be contributing to the greenhouse gas emitting meat, dairy, and egg industries, which they are contributing to greenhouse gases by the amount of food waste we produce. Even if it's vegan food, it doesn't matter. As the result of throwing our food away, we're creating greenhouse gases. We are harming animals. We are squandering food. We're squandering the resources that went into growing our food. We're wasting money. We're over-consuming unnecessary calories. That is the result of us not taking responsibility for what we take into our homes. And so while reducing food loss and food waste is the number one thing we want to do, we want to start there. Once we've exhausted all of those options, putting organic matter back into the earth to contribute to the growth of new organic matter, i.e. composting, it's the best thing we can do. So what is compost? What does it mean to compost? What does it entail? Why is it so valuable? How does it meet zero waste and circular economy criteria? And how can we do it wherever we live? Those are some of the questions we're going to answer today. Now, the word compost simply means mixture. It came into English through Old French, originally from the Latin word composita. Of course, I have to do the etymology of the word because to me that's really interesting. I hope you find it as interesting as I do. Compost has the same root as the English word compote, which of course is a mixture. So these words mean mixture. Compote is a mixture of fruit and spices preserved in wine or in sugar and vinegar, etc. Compost, as we use that word today, and as it's been used since at least the 16th century, is a mixture of organic matter that has been decayed or that's been digested by organisms, and it's used as a fertilizer to improve soil structure, provide nutrients, and enrich the land. Now, manure, as in animal waste, poop, feces, dung, is also used for this purpose and has been for millennia, initially out of human ingenuity and necessity. But the only animal poop we're going to be talking about today is that which comes from worms or other macroorganisms who love to feast on organic matter and whose poop, along with the work of microorganisms, is one of the ways rich fertilizer called compost is created. In fact, the best soil, when you talk about gardens and people, how do you reduce the number of of destructive insects, and how do you take care of diseases. And the best thing you can do when you're gardening, if you garden, is to have the best soil possible. And the best soil is soil that's been enriched by organic matter, i.e. compost. If anyone tells you that one of the reasons we need to keep farming animals, it's one of the excuses I hear as vegan when people are trying to find reasons for continuing to farm animals. One of the things they'll say is, but we need their poop to fertilize soil. You can tell them that's a load of crap. Oh, no pun there. Of course, that's one way to do it. And when Homo sapiens were honing their agricultural skills thousands of years ago, it was very useful. But that's when there were a lot fewer humans on the planet and way, way fewer animals being kept and confined for their milk, for their eggs, and their flesh. Today, humans confine billions. Did you get that? Billions of animals all around the world. So the idea that we need to keep doing that because of, keeping some soil healthy for those who grow the food is absolutely ludicrous. It's just an excuse, and it's a bad one, because truly there is a real crisis because of all of the waste those animals create, polluting waterways, polluting air and soil. There are so many reasons why it's not good to have billions of animals' excretions, their urine and their feces, polluting our earth. I mean, that's quite literally what's happening. So theoretically speaking, sure, using animal manure is one way to fertilize soil. So is using human manure, to be honest. There is human manure that some people use to fertilize soil, but practically speaking, it's certainly not the best way to go about enriching soil. Well, speaking about the farmed animals, because of the problems that are created because of their waste. A much better, a much simpler, a much cleaner, healthier, more compassionate way, especially since you're not supporting the animal agriculture industry, to go about creating soil enrichments is simply by allowing organic plant matter to break down naturally. Healthy soil is everything. But worldwide, humans have pretty much depleted soil of its nutrients. And ironically, the only way to rectify this is through human intervention. It's up to us to put nutrients back into the soil so existing plants and new plants can thrive. If plants thrive, animals thrive. If plants thrive, we can all, humans and non-humans, eat. If plants thrive, greenhouse gases are reduced and air quality is improved. It's a little obvious, but we kind of need plants and we want them to be healthy. And the way to ensure their health is to grow them in healthy soil. In fact, the more nutrients in the soil, the more nutrients in the plants we eat. Of course, the more nutrients in the soil, the more nutrients in all the plants that even animals eat. It's one of the issues that's been an issue here with the drought in California. When you think about the soil not being enriched, especially through water and through all of the organisms that thrive in moist soil, etc., if those plants are not thriving because the soil is not thriving, the animals are not getting the nutrients because the nutrients, the minerals, are not getting up into the plants. So it, of course, affects other animals besides humans. But many studies indicate that because of modern intensive agricultural methods and chemical fertilizers that are stripping nutrients from the soil in which the food that is grown for humans to eat, each successive of fast-growing and pest-resistant vegetables and fruits are actually less nutritious than they were just decades ago. And this is why purchasing organic produce is not frivolous or novel. Organic planting, organic farming, organic gardening has so many benefits for us, for the earth, and for the animals. And the foundation of organic gardening is cultivating healthy soil. When the soil is healthy, harmful pests and diseases are less inclined to overtake crops. And of course, in working with nature, i.e. organic farming, or organic gardening, in working with nature, you don't rely on poisons, on toxic pesticides and fungicides which means other animals aren't sickened and killed when they ingest those poisons, when they eat lower on the food chain, et cetera, et cetera. So it means so many things. And it means, of course, the produce we eat is more nutrient rich. It's a win-win. Now, I know a lot of people perceive organic produce as being too costly. And I've talked a lot about this in my podcast, in my books, especially in the 30-Day Vegan Challenge. I talk about the fact that the problem is not that organic produce is more expensive. The problem is that all of the worst agricultural products, worst for humans, for the animals, for the earth, are artificially cheap because of government subsidies. And that includes all animal products as well as conventionally grown produce, plant foods, those grown with pesticides and intensive techniques. So cheap food comes with high costs. And you can find out more about this idea in this podcast and in the 30-Day Vegan Challenge. But you're paying the true cost of food. You're paying to support healthy growing when you buy organic. Now, this is not an episode on organic gardening. I'm not trying to convince you to garden, but what I'm trying to convey is the big picture in the context of environmental stewardship, zero waste principles, animal protection. All of this is related. So even if you're not going to take what you learn here today to garden yourself, that's fine. I just want to plant some seeds. Another little pun there, to get you thinking about why healthy soil in general is important and how it affects us and the earth and the animals, and how you can contribute to it not only by buying organic produce when you can, but also by composting. So if you do start composting at home and you don't garden, you can give that compost away to others who do garden. I would love it if someone approached me and said, would you like my compost? I've made some compost and would you like to have it? Yes, I would. Thank you very much. I'll put it in my garden. So just because you compost at home doesn't mean you have to have a garden. You can give it away to neighbors, to friends, to family, to gardeners, to garden centers. There are so many people who would take your compost, put it on free cycle, and you will be overwhelmed with responses from people who want your compost. You can also just sprinkle it around on the outside. Like I assume, hopefully you have outdoor access. And so you can just take that compost and sprinkle it around in your yard, even if it's a small yard, or in a park, or just on the street where there's street trees. So you can take that compost. You don't have to have a garden in order to compost, okay? And how wonderful that all of us every day take into our homes exactly what we need to create the enrichments for that soil. Remember, zero waste is about valuing what we take into our lives and using that up, whatever it is we take into our lives, using it up to get the most value out of it. And there's no better way to get value out of the fruits and vegetables we bring into our homes than to either one, A or one, to eat them. Number one, eat them, right? That's the best way to get value out of the fruits and vegetables we bring into our homes. And please revisit part 2 to talk about how you can make sure that those vegetables stay intact so that you can eat them and don't throw them away so that they don't go bad. So that's the best way to get the value out of fruits and vegetables, is to make sure, well, you're storing them correctly so that you can eat them. Number 1. Number 2, or B, you can convert what you don't eat into another use. So once you've made your salad and you eat those vegetables, the parts of the fruits and vegetables you put into your salad, you can make vegetable stock. You can make, zest if you use oranges. We'll get into more details about that, and I talk a lot about that in part 2. But so number 1, to get the most value out of the fruits and vegetables you take in is to eat them. Number 2 is to convert what you don't eat into another use. And number 3 is to convert what you don't use into compost. Or even better, take number 2, like make a vegetable stock first, and then take those scraps and compost them. So you're just getting the most out of what those plant foods are meant to do. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that very exciting, that concept of valuing what we take into our lives. Does that make sense? So how do we do this? How do we do number 3? Well, you can compost at home First of all, in terms of taking those scraps and making sure they get turned into compost. You can compost at home, which is what we're going to talk about today. Or number two, you can rely on green waste pickup via a municipal program, like I said, we have here in Oakland, or a private compost program, and I'll talk about that as well. What I'm going to focus on today is number one, which is you doing it at home. Because although curbside collection of waste, food waste, and yard waste is increasing, it's not the norm yet. We have it here in Oakland. San Francisco has it. New York City has it. Boston, I believe, has it. So there are some cities doing it. But I even, as I said, use it as a backup, not as a primary means of disposing of our green waste. So we'll come back to municipal programs and private programs after we talk about what you can do at home. And make sure you visit the post for today's episode at joyfulvegan.com, because there will be lots of links and resources there. And of course, supporters at $10 and above get this transcript. One link you'll find here on this transcript and on the website is a handy guide for finding composting services near you if you don't wind up taking all of my awesome advice and compost at home, but I hope you do. Now, this is where it's overwhelming. People don't know where to start. There's so much information out there and you will get so many different opinions. And so I want to make it easy. I want to make it simple as possible. So when you think about composting, you can think about 3 different methods of composting. You can have a compost pile, number 1. You can have a compost bin, number 2, or you can have a worm bin, number 3. Vermicompost is called. And number 1 entails starting a pile in a contained area somewhere in your yard. And that's not what I'm going to be talking about today because I've never done it. I live in a city with limited space. Plus, it's a lot more work than my preferred method, which is what I'm going to talk about today. It's a lot easier to use a compost bin, which is number 2. Now, the advantage of number 1, just starting a pile in your backyard, and if you live in a more rural area where you have more space, you can do this. It's I was going to say it's easy. It is simple. It's just, it requires a little bit more elbow grease. The advantage of doing that is that it's free. Lots of people will still contain the pile with maybe chicken wire or a little kind of fencing around it, but it's free in that sense. Using a compost bin means you need to buy one. So there's a little upfront investment when you go this route. Of course, you can make a compost bin, but you can consult your friendly YouTube channel for tutorials. I am not going to be able to tell you how to build a compost bin. That's not my sweet spot, but there are a range of compost bins on the market. Some are cheaper than others. Some are more effective than others. Some are a pain to use. And that's why I'm talking about my favorite and why I recommend it. And as I said, 2 lucky people will be the proud new owners of my favorite compost bin. Well, not mine. You're not taking my compost bin, but because we have the giveaway from EnviroCycle, 2 lucky winners will get a compost bin each. So stay tuned. I'm so excited for you to win these bins and for me to talk all about it. First, I do want to thank you who are helping me create this podcast and convey this information. The number of hours I spent researching and writing, it took me a long time between parts 2 and 3, if you didn't notice, to convey this information to you because I really want it to be perfect and I want it to be right and I want it to be helpful and I want it to be inspiring. So you who support this podcast make this possible. I don't do this for fun. I could sit around and read Shakespeare if I really wanted to, but I don't want to do that. I want to inspire people and I want to empower you. And the only way I'm able to do that is because you support this podcast. That is really the truth. So thank you to everybody who does support it. Please consider becoming a supporter at Patreon. I'm working on some really fun additional perks for you, but you can go look at all the perks that are there right now. Thank you for subscribing to the podcast, but really thank you for supporting it. Thank you to our platinum supporters, Tim Anderson, Renee Marinkovich, David Cabrera, Alexander Gray, Morgan Hall, Michal Stone, and Ulrich. And if you want to get on that list, you can become a platinum supporter. And as I said, there's lots of different perks for different levels. So you can also make a one-time donation at joyfulvegan.com. You can just click on the donate button, or you can go to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. I really appreciate hearing from many listeners. I mean, I really do feel like I'm NPR, because they'll say, I've been listening to you for years and I haven't ever become a supporter, but here's my support. I don't know if you listen to NPR, but there's a really great segment during the pledge drives when Ira Glass, Ira Flato's another presenter, Ira Glass, who's the host of This American Life. It's really fun because he basically shames the listeners into supporting, in the sense that, like a family member will out their other family member by saying like, oh, they've been listening for a long time, but they won't support. And so Ira will call them and say, hey, just want to know, like, why haven't you supported yet? Like, why? And they're usually like, I'm just lazy, or I figure everybody else is doing it, or, whatever. Just, there's never a good reason, and it really does inspire them. So don't make me call you. Don't make me call you. This is my call to you. This is my call to you to become a supporter. So if you've been listening, if you listened at one time and you had to cancel your support, now is the time to renew. So I spend all of my waking hours and even some of my sleeping hours working on content for you. And I very much appreciate your support and need it. So there's my pitch. Let's return to compost bins. Now, if you're going the bin route, some municipalities sell compost bins at a discount to residents. I remember there was a time when Oakland was doing this a long time ago. But honestly, you could find really good deals on Craigslist, eBay, your neighborhood listserv like Nextdoor, Free Cycle, to get your hands on a compost bin. The reason I'm, very enthusiastically sharing information about the EnviroCycle one that we use is because we've been using it for 15 years, and I can tell you that it works really well. And there are some compost bins that, you might pay for them and then not really like them, and you're kind of stuck with them. Certainly getting one on Free Cycle is an option, but I'm here to tell you what works really well. So the reason having a compost pile in the backyard is labor intensive, I said it take some elbow grease, is because one of the conditions for creating compost is oxygen. And we're going to talk about all of the conditions, but one of them is oxygen. And what that means in terms of a compost pile is that pile needs to be turned. So depending on the size of the pile, it can get pretty difficult to turn it. Now, the larger the pile, the hotter it is, which is what you're also looking for. But it also means that it can be really a pain. So you have to get a pitchfork and you turn it. You toss it. Well, it's the same issue if you have a compost bin. You still need oxygen, but the benefit is that you're keeping everything contained in the bin itself, but you still have to make sure you're aerating the materials within, and it can kind of be a pain. So better than a pile or just a regular compost bin, are compost tumblers, which means you tumble the entire drum, or you turn it or you spin it. It's a self-contained drum, rather than stirring and mixing and tossing the materials directly with a pitchfork. It's so much easier. Many composters, like myself, swear by compost tumblers. Of course, because all of the green and brown waste is fully enclosed in the drum, it also means it doesn't smell. Now, we're going to talk about the fact that compost bins should not smell. It should not smell like rotting food. Something has gone awry if it smells like rotting food. So we'll talk about how to avoid that, but you shouldn't have stinky compost bins. When I open my compost bin, it smells really good. I actually really like the smell. And so that's the idea. But if you're, starting to compost and you're still kind of working on things and you did something wrong and it's not going right, the point is that it's all self-contained in this tumbler so that you don't have any odors. So don't worry about that. You're not going to smell it. When you're doing it wrong, you will smell it. And we've been through that. Also, insulation that's created inside the bin speeds up the composting process. So that's another advantage of the compost tumbler. You can compost year round, even in colder temperatures, because really the internal temperature inside the tumbler is what creates the compost. And of course, because it's all self-contained and there's a cover, it can't be accessed by critters who might want to get into your bin, like rodents or raccoons or dogs. So there are a range of tumblers on the market. Some are better than others. You can look at reviews. You can go and find other people's favorites, and maybe you want to get a different one. That's totally fine. There are many variables, including ease of use, size of the tumbler, the efficiency, the efficacy, even the look, because, this might be in a place where you see it all the time, or you see it from your house and you want it to look nice too. So there are a lot of variables, but because I've already done this work for you, you don't have to. So the tumbler composter that I recommend, like I said, we've been using it for almost 15 years. Actually, we've had 2 for this long a time, and we still use them daily. Is called the EnviroCycle, as I've mentioned. It's also called the most beautiful composter in the world, which is what they call it. It comes in black and it comes in pink, and it's really cute because some people really want the pink one. I was sharing this with some people and they were like, oh, I really like that pink one. It's really cute. You can get a pink one. We have the black ones. It comes in a larger 35-gallon drum, or the mini composter, which is called the cutest composter in the world, in 17 gallons. And because of the giveaway that EnviroCycle is generously offering, 2 lucky winners will get their very own. So just go to joyfulvegan.com/compost to enter. Now, if you hear this episode after the giveaway ends, you can still please go to that link, because there's lots of information there, but you'll also get a link to the bin yourself, to the bin that I'm recommending. And what I'm hoping for is getting a discount for you. But even if I don't get a discount, if you use that link, it's a really good price. It's an affiliate link through Amazon, so I do get a kickback for it, just full disclosure, but it's just a few bucks, and I genuinely recommend this particular bin. Did I mention we've been using it for almost 15 years? So this was long before I was, reaching out to EnviroCycle to see if they can do something for my listeners. This is a genuine endorsement, because that's what I do. If I use something that I love, you will hear about it. It comes ready to use, which is another thing we love about it. There's no assembly required. Some of them require assembly, some of the tumblers. This one doesn't. It comes right out of the 100% recycled box, which you can then compost, and I'll tell you about how. It sits on a track of wheels on a base that we have right outside our kitchen door. We actually have 4. We have 3 of the large ones and 1 of the small ones. And I actually have a video for you at joyfulvegan.com/compost. But we like it right outside the kitchen door. Makes it really easy to go out there with your scraps. But you can put it anywhere. You can put it in a garden, on a deck, on a patio, on a balcony, especially the smaller 17-gallon one. It's so cute. It really is the cutest composter in the world. The small one, it's precious. Now we have 2 of ours sitting on raised platforms. And 2 sitting on the ground. We've been putting them on a platform for a long time, even in our old house when we had them. And the reason we did that is because it makes it easier to tip the base to get the compost tea out of the base. And compost tea is not for drinking. It's just a concentrated liquid compost. But honestly, to be honest, since we've gotten our new ones, we keep them on the ground. I find it easier to spin them. And it's easier also to just roll the drum off the base if you want to roll it right to your garden patch. So it is easier just to keep it on the ground. They're super easy to use. I do think it helps to have 2 compost tumblers, but maybe you want to wait to get 2 until you get comfortable with this. But if you already have 1 and you're thinking of getting a second, then get a second one. Because once you're finished adding to 1, you can let it do its thing while you start adding scraps to another one. If you only ever continually add to 1, it's harder to get the final product, which is the compost. It's like adding flour to a cake that's already baking in the oven. The more you keep fussing with it, the less of a chance it's going to actually finish, or it'll take a really long time to do so. So that's why we have more than 1. And because we've had these for so long, it really is quite worth the initial investment. They're solid as a tank. They last forever. And actually the ones that I am offering you today, or that EnviroCycle is offering you today to win, or that I'm suggesting you buy if you are looking for a compost bin, there are some improvements in the ones that are available today, mainly because they didn't really have to do much to improve. Mainly they have vents on the side to create a little more oxygen and aeration going into the tumbler. For ours, we just drilled some holes to create some aeration, some ventilation in the actual drum. But that's one of the advantages of the new ones that they have today. So I mentioned the compost tea at the base. It's one of the things I like about it as well. We do use it. It's concentrated. Some composters feel that it's just water because just the wet ingredient, when the solid ingredients inside the drum are really wet, it's just water going down. But we still use it. You can use it. You can dilute it, and you can just pour it right on your plants. And also, it should smell just completely neutral. There should be no smell to it at all. So that's the compost bin I recommend. The EnviroCycle, most beautiful composter in the world, or the cutest composter in the world. And as I said, I can definitely vouch for it. So that's the number one thing you want to do when you're thinking about composting. The number one thing is to figure out how you're going to compost. So assuming you're not going to use a compost pile, or maybe you will, so that's fine. So number one, how are you going to compost? Is it going to be a pile? If it's going to be a bin, what kind of bin are you going to get? Where are you going to keep them? The more convenient it is for you, the better. You can place them anywhere you like. It doesn't matter if they're in the sun or the shade, because as I said, it's the internal temperature that really determines your compost. If you're able to place it where it gets some sunlight, that's great, but it is a self-contained drum. Some people who have piles, if it's in a direct sun, it can dry out and you do have to add water to it. But for the tumblers, it really doesn't matter. You can keep them in the shade. You can keep them in the sun. It's really whatever's most convenient for you. So that's number one. Number two is, let's talk about some of the principles, the basic principles of composting, so you know how this magic is created so you can succeed as a composter. There are 3 components organisms need in order to do their job, in order to thrive. They need food, they need air or oxygen, and they need water or moisture. So food is in the form of carbon and nitrogen. Just think of those 2. You can talk about them interchangeably as brown and green, or dry and wet. So carbon and nitrogen, dry and wet, brown and green. Okay, carbon is brown, nitrogen is green. So food in the form of carbon and nitrogen, oxygen and moisture. Microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi account for most of the decomposition that takes place in a pile. But macroorganisms such as snails or millipedes or spiders, slugs, beetles, or earthworms, or other kinds of worms also help decompose materials by grinding and biting and sucking and chewing them into smaller pieces. The macroorganisms really speed things up, which is why some people use worms for composting, whose poop, also called castings. I don't know why they make different names up. Like with bats, they call it guano. For worm poop, they call it castings. So if you've ever seen in the garden store worm castings, that's what it is. It just means worm poop. It's very nutrient rich. So it's worth mentioning them here because some of you listeners live in apartments and you don't have an outdoor space for a compost bin. And so you might consider a worm bin inside. Now keep in mind, even if you have a traditional bin or a tumbler bin, worms may get in there and they can help things along. It doesn't have to necessarily be like no worms in this one and only worms in this one. But typically speaking, and of course the advice I'm giving you is it's really the microorganisms who are doing most of the work. But having the right bin to accommodate worms, if you are going to do that, is the way to go, because worms really don't thrive in a tumbler. Well, I'm saying that aware of the fact that there are worms in one of our tumblers. It's turned into a worm bin because worms got in there probably from soil we would have put in there at one point, or there were worm eggs in there or worms. And so they are now thriving. And so one of our tumblers has turned into a worm bin, but that's not really ideal because the worms, first of all, you want the internal temperature of your compost bin to be pretty hot, and worms don't like it very hot. They're very particular. They're very picky worms. Number 2, they don't like to be tumbled around, even though we have done that because we didn't realize it was like a freaking colony of worms in there, and they're fine. So it's not conducive to that. And also it's hard to get the compost out because there are all these worms who want to eat whatever's in there. So ideally, if you are going to do worm composting, you want a particular kind of compost bin, which is meant for worms. Now, there are a number of different type of worm bins out there, and yes, they can absolutely be kept inside. In fact, the worms are quite happy inside. They don't like it to be too hot. They certainly don't like it to be too cold. They don't like bright light. They don't want the temperature inside to be too hot. So having a worm compost bin inside is ideal because the temperature would be very regulated. I know a lot of people who have them in their kitchen or even their living room because some are very pretty. They're just made of wood and you would never know that there's a colony of worms in there sucking and pooping away. Now, the one I recommend is also at joyfulvegan.com/compost, and it's called the Worm Factory. People swear by it. I can't vouch for it just because I don't have one, but people really do vouch for it. And unlike with the tumblers, you just rotate the trays. The worms start at the bottom. They eat your food. They poop. They move there's the Worm Factory has something called a worm ladder. They move up and they then start eating the other food in the next tray and so on and so on. You just keep rotating the trays and you take the ones that they're finished with. Ideally, it's finished compost, and then you put it, like I said, in the garden or wherever. That's the idea. Worms eat a lot, but you don't want to overwhelm them. And I will emphasize again and again, well, I'm not going to tell you yet, the trick to getting the best compost fastest. You don't have to stay tuned for that. You don't have to stay tuned. My trick, it is brilliant. It's a brilliant trick. And this would apply to whether you have a worm bin or a regular compost pile or a regular compost bin or a tumbler bin. Now, the type of worms used in a bin vary, but they're typically red wigglers you'll hear talked about a lot. So that is another option. Now, just to further that thought, some people have asked me if it's ethical to keep worms for composting. In the end, you are going to have to make your own decision and draw your own line, as we all do as vegans, because there are a lot of things to consider in this world, and it is not a perfect world. Now, as a vegan, I don't know if you've noticed, but some people may criticize you for being too extreme and going too far for being vegan. And some people will criticize you for not going far enough. That is the nature of being vegan. And most of the people who criticize you for not going far enough are other vegans, to be honest. Everyone has to find their own line. I personally don't have a problem with people having worm composters. In the scheme of things, it is harmless. One of our tumblers, as I said, turned into a worm bin. They're so happy. We make sure that they're taken care of, and that's how most people are who have worm composters. They treat them like pets. Now, if you don't believe in having pets, if you don't believe in having dogs and cats, which some vegans don't, then you might have a problem with being a guardian to worms. Some people also have a problem with it because they see it as using the worms. They see it as an exploitative process or exploitative relationship. That's one way to look at it. I think there's an argument to be made for it being a mutually beneficial relationship. Worms get to eat and poop and reproduce all day, kind of their favorite things to do. And the result of their favorite things is a pretty awesome, rich material called compost that then enriches our soil and plants. Now, I know that people use that same argument to keep farm animals. That's a bunch of bunk. It's a very different situation when you're talking about worms who actually live in their environment. Some people also say that keeping worms in containers limits their movement and freedom, but I also think you have to just step back. Worms will make their way to compost piles and stay there because that's where they thrive. The red wigglers in particular, they live in large groups. They're usually a ball of worms. If you just go into your bin and you just lift up some of the soil, they're all there just eating. They're non-migratory red wigglers. So once they find a comfortable place that supplies a plentiful food source and they have the right temperature and they have the right moisture, they're happy and they don't want to move. As far as where to get the worms, you do need to start with a pretty high number of worms. I think people buy them by the thousands. So you need to start with a large amount, although we didn't, because I think ours just got in through the soil. But personally, I wouldn't buy the worms from a bait shop because I don't want to support a fishing shop of the fishing industry. But there are many people who would give you worms. A lot of people who compost, go to Craigslist, go to Free Cycle. Even if they charge like $20 for the worms, I don't have a problem with that. But honestly, you could probably find them on Free Cycle. You can get them from a local composter or a garden center. So those are options to get it without buying them from a bait shop. The bottom line is, to be honest, if you had to really weigh it, if it came down to, okay, I don't have any outdoor space. I don't have green waste pickup in where I live. I live in an apartment. So I don't, but I want to reduce my food waste. Right. So a worm bin is my only option versus, there's an ideological opposition to worm bins. So I will just continue to produce food waste that actually has really harmful consequences. Like, there aren't harmful consequences, and I'm going to just kind of speak for the worms. I really think the worms are happy, to be honest. So just speaking for the worms, it's a pretty ideal situation for them versus a pretty dismal situation in the dumps that we're creating because of all of our food waste. Now, if you've reduced your food waste such that you have none because you've applied all the principles in part 2, and you have no food waste ever, that would be highly unlikely, then maybe it's not an issue for you. But honestly, food waste is a real problem. And I would rather see us reduce food waste. And if the only way for some people to do that is to have a worm bin, no judgment from me. Now, I don't use worm bins. I use the tumblers. I just prefer that. But if the only option is to have a worm bin, then no judgment from me. So the most exciting thing to talk about now is you've decided on your compost bin. You know where you're putting it. You understand the principles. Now you need to start filling it and making compost, the most exciting part. Well, I don't know. I actually find a lot of parts exciting, but that's just me. I'm a total dork. Okay, so you have an empty drum. The first thing you want to do is you want to put a few handfuls of rich compost into your empty drum. Now you're thinking, wait, I don't have compost. That's why I want to compost. But you could probably find some compost somewhere. You might have a friend. You might have some at a garden store. You might have a garden center that would give you some. I honestly think a nursery or someone would probably give you a pail full, to be honest, because if you don't want to get any plastic, because you're not going to find compost in a paper bag. But again, on FreeCycle and on Craigslist, I think you will find compost that, just a pail full that you could use to start your compost tumbler. If you can't, then just at least use some dirt that's just a little enriched, that's just not totally dry. So just starting with some dirt, starting with some soil, starting with some rich soil or compost is going to be the number one thing. But don't be afraid to start. If you don't have compost, just start it with some soil. Okay. Number 2, feeding your compost bin. Now, I told you there are 3 components: food, oxygen, and moisture. Let's talk about the food. Once you start composting, you learn very quickly that carbon is brown and nitrogen is green. Okay, so I'll talk interchangeably about brown or carbon and green or nitrogen. That's just kind of what you do. And you kind of obsess, because now what happens when you compost is you see everything through the lens of, is that green? Is that something I could use? Is that brown? Is that something I could use for my compost? So everything just becomes a potential material you could add to your bin. Now, nitrogen is very easy to get your hands on. It's all your veggie scraps. High nitrogen materials do tend to be green, so it's easy to identify them, but just think of them, just plants that you bring into your home, anything, right? Fruits, vegetables, lawn and grass clippings, weeds that have not gone to seed, because you don't want to start growing things in your compost bin, seaweed, flower cuttings, nutshells, fruit pits, grains, including cooked grains, including breads, cereals, rice, pastas, houseplants. Did I say houseplants? Potting soil, plate scrapings, coffee grounds, and tea leaves. Okay, so that's all of your green materials. Your carbon, your brown, your carbon tends to be brown, tends to be dry. So think about cardboard boxes, brown paper bags, used paper towels, toilet paper rolls, paper towel rolls, shredded leaves, shrub prunings, straw or hay, pine needles, newspapers, shredded paper, sawdust pellets, wood chips, bedding if you have hamsters or gerbils or rabbits, bedding from their cages, from their little enclosures, used napkins, used paper towels, paper coffee filters unbleached, right? So all of those things they're all brown, they're all carbon. Now, when we're talking about coffee, just very briefly, hopefully you'll consider getting reusable coffee filters for your coffee maker, as opposed to even the paper filters, even though you can use them for your compost bin. If you're not composting, I do recommend, or even if you are, to be honest, just reducing something like that is a good thing. So we're using reusable coffee filters, and please, 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 reconsider if you have one of those Keurig K-Cup coffee machines, reconsider just putting it aside, because those little pods, the ones that have like the single serve brewing pods, they are neither biodegradable nor are they recyclable. Even the creator said he feels bad for ever having created the thing. He sold the company years ago. Billions of those pods go into landfills every year. They will never break down. You can even join the Kill the K-Cup revolution by using the hashtag Kill the K-Cup. But please tell your friends and family, if you don't have one yourself, that they're just so environmentally problematic. So coffee grounds, yes. Coffee filters, technically paper, yes. But hopefully you'll switch to the reusable. That's what you put in terms of just and I have there's a wonderful graphic that we've made that supporters will get. It's just a beautiful graphic that has it all laid out so that you know right away what's green and what's brown. But let's get even nittier, grittier, because there are so many questions. You start looking at everything and you go, can that go in? Can that go in? What about that? Okay. I said tea leaves make awesome green additions to your compost bin, but sadly, many tea bags are not compostable. 20 to 30% may be composed of polypropylene, which is a type of plastic, which will not decompose. Yes, there is plastic in tea bags. So if this is the case, slit open the bag, dump the leaves into the compost pile, your little compost pail, but you'll have to discard and throw into the trash, into the landfill, your tea bag. So if you have tea bags and you're 100% sure they're paper, then okay. But I can tell you that as of this recording, propylene is used by most of the large tea bag companies, including Tetley and Twinings, and in the UK, PG Tips and Clipper. So, but hopefully I can convince you to not use tea bags at all, not only because tea bags are not zero waste. I mean, even the string, the tab, the string, you could probably compost that, to be honest, but also because loose tea is amazing and fresh and better, and tea sold in bags, let's just say it's not. Now remember Far Leaves. I've talked about Far Leaves before. Far Leaves, farleaves.com. That's where I get my tea. They're in Berkeley. If you're local, they're so wonderful. I used to get them shipped. Well, actually, they used to drop them off because they live close by. So they used to just drop my tea off after I ordered it online. They do come in aluminum, food grade aluminum tins with paper around the outside. So they are quite literally 100% recyclable. However, and so if you do order them online, I really do feel good about recommending them, their tea. But if you are local in the San Francisco Bay Area, I walk in now and I used to get them dropped off, which was pretty convenient. But now I go to Far Leaves, I bring my jars, and they fill up my empty jars with their gorgeous tea. And for years, they have offered a discount code. If you put in Colleen, Colleen, in the coupon code, as a coupon code, you get 10% off. They've just offered that for years because they just know I'm a good customer and I love passing them on to other people. So 10% off. And I'll just tell you some of my favorites is the Bi Lu Shun, the Dong Ding, the Dragon Well, the Silver Needle, mostly green. The Silver Needle is white. The Dong Ding is oolong. So those are some of my favorites. The Purple Bamboo, and I'm blanking on one of my absolute favorite. Oh, the Cloud Mist is also a favorite, which is a green. So farleaves.com. So tea, 100% compostable. Tea bags, not so much. Corn cobs and like the stalks, they take a long time to break down. So chop them up first or put them in the blender or the food processor to chop them up. No animal products by the way. No animal products. They're just pathogens that can't be broken down by the microorganisms properly. So I know that most of you listening are vegan or vegetarian. I would imagine you're not putting meat in. However, some of you have cats like I do. And there's cat food or dog food if your dogs aren't vegetarian. Don't put any meat or animal products in your compost bin. Next, here's an eye-opener for you. You know those biodegradable cups, quote unquote biodegradable cups and spoons in bags, or bioplastic as they're called. They are theoretically supposed to biodegrade, but they really don't. They have to be put through like an industrial compost facility so that they can be exposed to the proper conditions to ensure decomposition. Even my green bin here in Oakland, they don't accept bioplastics for the compost bin. At BioBag, same kind of thing. So I used to use these because I thought they were a good alternative, obviously, to plastic, and they are. But the best alternative to plastic or to bioplastics is just glass. And so now when I have an event where I need, cups, for instance, the Compassion in Action Conference, this year it will be, last year was pretty close to zero waste, to be honest. This year is going to be zero waste again. And we, if we're in a facility that doesn't offer mugs and glasses for water, etc., we bring everything with us and we wash them ourselves. I'll do an event for like the East Bay Animal Pack, for instance, if we do an event or a fundraiser, and I bring glasses and I bring them home and I wash them. So that's the best option, but you cannot put those things in probably your city. I would check with your city first if you do have a green pickup. You certainly can't put them in your own compost bin. Wine corks. Actually, wine corks can be added to your compost pile, can definitely be thrown in the city's bin, but I would chop them up into small pieces before putting them in your compost pile. If you can't chop them up or you don't have a green bin, you can recycle them. So at least that's an option. But there are some corks, wine corks for bottles that are plastic and not natural cork. So just make sure of that. And if you can't tell, and you should be able to tell, then you can contact the winery and find out. Dryer lint is another one people ask me about. If your laundry is made from 100% natural fibers, such as cotton or linen or hemp, then the dryer lint will be compostable. But if the dryer lint is formed because you've put synthetic fibers in your dryer, then those synthetic fibers in the dryer lint will not break down. Now, if you want to just do a load with just, cotton sheets and cotton towels, then the lint will be compostable. But I have a lot of synthetic clothes, things that have, spandex. I don't wear spandex, but there's a lot of things that have spandex, you know what I mean? So a lot of synthetic materials in your clothes. I'm sorry, that made me laugh. The synthetic materials will not create dryer lint that breaks down. Better yet, even better than using a dryer, which I do not do, is hanging your clothes. I've really been thinking about this, and I think I'm just realizing I have to make a commitment to give this a shot. We have the opportunity in our backyard with sun to hang dry some of our clothes and our sheets and towels and stuff, and I really should give it a shot. The thing is, I don't do the laundry. David does the laundry, so that's probably why I've never done this before. So I'd have to convince David to do it. I know, lucky me. So, by the way, regarding worms, and if you do get a worm compost bin, by the way, you'll get all the instructions you need for taking care of the worms. But just to give you a little hint, worms they're so picky. They don't love citrus. They don't love garlic. They don't love onions. I wouldn't also put like salad dressings and food scrapings that have heavy oils or anything seasoned with salt or sugar into your worm compost bin. They're very picky. So I would use those for a regular compost bin. They can tolerate a little bit of citrus, but not a lot. So again, if for those specific things, I have a beautiful guide that is a PDF. You can print it on compostable paper, or you can just access it as a PDF for those who are supporters. Everybody will get a copy. Now, some specifics in the brown arena, because you're also thinking, what about this? And what about that? What about newspapers? What about cardboard? So when we're talking about leaves and other yard scraps, obviously make sure that they're chemical free. You don't want to put pesticides in your compost bin. In the fall, I really recommend that you save the leaves you pick up, because you can grind them up and then you can, or just keep them in a bucket or pail or bags, and you can then use them throughout the year after the fall, throughout the seasons where there's no leaves falling. You can use those dried leaves, commandeer neighbors if you have space, because let me tell you something, once you start composting, all you do is look for brown materials because you have an abundance of green. So save those leaves. Newspapers. Most newspapers today use water or soy-based inks. I would stick to black and white newspapers, but I take newspapers from all of my neighbors, and I will tell you what I do with them, and I put them in my compost bin, and I feel very confident using the newspapers. Now you can go on some listservs for composters, and you're going to find some people saying they would absolutely never do it. Some people say they absolutely will do it. Some people say that they're thinking about it. You will find so many different opinions. I'm giving you mine. I have no problem using shredded newspaper for my compost bin. Same thing with office paper. You're going to get a lot of different opinions on that. The inks on the office paper, you can find out if you know exactly the ink that you're using. A lot of it's water soluble and not toxic, so they shred it and add it to their compost bin. I do it with some office paper. You don't want to do anything that's glossy. You don't want to do anything that, like a magazine, you wouldn't want to use. I will use, for instance, if there are, I don't get magazines, but the subscription pullouts, you can use those and you can shred those. Envelopes, junk mail. Non-glossy is fine. Again, if there's envelopes, remove the plastic window first. But I'm telling you that one of the things I'm also working on is probably be a blog post. It'll probably come up in the podcast, but I'm going to be talking about all the ways to reduce junk mail. When people ask me the most difficult thing about being zero waste, honestly, reducing junk mail is, I would say, the number one thing. It's a pain in the butt to reduce to stop mail from being delivered to me that I don't want. It's overwhelming, but I have made such progress, and I'm going to share with you everything that I do. So stay tuned and become a supporter. If you like that idea and want more information, that's the kind of thing you support. Another thing, brown-wise, is parchment paper. So I have parchment paper that I've had left over. So lots of things in my house that are left over from before I went zero waste. But parchment paper, not wax paper. You want to make sure it's not wax paper, and you want to make sure it's not parchment paper. You want to make sure it's not parchment paper with wax. So it has to be wax free, and you can tell pretty easily. But lots of parchment paper out there is just, unbleached paper, and it's non-stick for baking. And that's fantastic. So here's more of what you can put in your compost bin. Pizza boxes, used paper plates, as long as they don't have a waxy coating. Paper cupcake or muffin cups, unbleached, obviously. Toothpicks, 100% cotton balls, 100% cotton swabs, those made from cardboard, which you should definitely get, by the way. If you do use Q-tips, use the non-plastic Q-tips. I'm saying Q-tips, but that's the cotton swabs. So use the non-plastic sticks and use the ones that have cardboard. Did I say non-plastic? Right. Pencil shavings, the subscription cards from magazines. I mentioned wrapping paper rolls, hay bales. You might have part of outdoor or fall decor. You can put those in, and your Christmas tree. You can chop up your Christmas tree. You can chop it up with pruners. You can use a wood chipper, and that can go into your compost bin. And now, are you ready for the best tip you're ever going to hear about composting successfully and quickly? But first, I'm just kidding. This is the best tip, and I'm going to tell you right now, the smaller your green and brown materials are, the faster and more easily the microorganisms can break them down. The smaller they are, the better. I used to, here's one of my compost fails. We got lazy one time. And at one point we were lazy, and we were putting, I would, chop things up and just throw them in the pail. And then we were putting them in our compost bin in these huge chunks. We don't have that large a compost bin. It takes a long time for those things to break down. So I've changed my ways. And now for the green materials, I chop them up small, and it doesn't have to be tiny, but small. So if I'm, chopping up things for a salad, I'm going to then chop up the things that go into the compost bin smaller than I certainly was doing in the past. You can also pulse them in a food processor or a blender. It's very easy. So if you have an apple, right, and then you've got the core, you can just take a few seconds to chop that core up into smaller pieces. Easy peasy. Banana peel, same thing. Avocado peel, same thing. Avocado pit, peach pits, those kinds of things you can chop up. I would put those in a food processor or blender because they could be slippery, especially the avocado pit. And you could cut yourself, which you don't want to do. So just put that avocado pit in a food processor. And that's an example of sometimes if I just don't want to do that, I will throw that into the city's green bin. Now, that's basically it. But I want to tell you about kind of my system because it's changed a little bit over the years. Because I want to use everything up, like I said, I want to really value what it is I have. I do now separate out those things that I'm going to make a stock with and those things that I put in the compost bin. And I still compost the vegetables after they've made the stock for me. But here's what I do. I have my cutting board out and I am making a salad, let's say, or a soup, whatever. I've got kale, I've got carrots, I've got celery, I've got broccoli, I've got, potatoes if I'm making a soup, I've got avocado, right? So what I do is while I'm making that and I have scraps from any of those vegetables, I take the scraps and I don't have to cut these smaller. I just put them in, you can put them in a bowl or I put them in a soup pot. I actually like having them in a soup pot because I'm not going to make the stock right away. Usually I do it at night. And so I put the lid on the stock pot, right? It's just a convenient way to do it. And it's stainless steel and it's nice. And I just kind of put it over on the stove. That way it's just out of the way and it still looks pretty. But you can do this in a stainless steel bowl or any kind of bowl or whatever. So that becomes my pile of, I'm going to make a stock later. If you don't make a stock right away, you can put that in the refrigerator or the freezer. A lot of people put them in bags in the freezer. I don't do that. I just kind of do it within the 24-hour period. But if you're, running out and you're going to be out for the night and you can't make stock that night, just throw that bowl or that stock pot in the refrigerator. Just keep it fresher. And then make your stock, right? So you have that separate. Those things that can't be put in my stock or that I don't want to put in my stock, like strawberries, like heads, I don't know, leaves I actually have been putting in my fruit smoothie, strawberry leaves. But let's say it's something like the core of an apple, as I said, or I'm trying to think of other things I wouldn't put in. Mostly it would be fruit. Some people don't like making vegetable stock with a lot of cruciferous vegetables. They think it gets too bitter, but like broccoli and cauliflower, but I haven't really found that. So I do put them in my stock. But those things that you wouldn't put in your stock, I do then chop up small and I put them in my pail. Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about is creating the balance between the green and the brown. And what I have on my counter next to, when I'm chopping up vegetables, I have it on my counter all the time. But when I'm doing my veggies, I've got my little stainless steel pail and I've got my stock pot, my soup pot. I put the soup stock pot related things in that pot, and then I put the smaller things into my pail. And those things are the things that go into the compost bin. And because I do this, I have this whole system now, and because I'm reducing food waste in general, it's not like I have a ton of compost like I used to, which is actually nice. I used to be like, this is awesome. This is all just going to make compost. Well, maybe not. Maybe because I was just putting them in so large, they wasn't really generating a lot of compost, to be honest. And so now my pail doesn't get overfilled. And that's what I like about it. Once I make the stock, I do take those vegetables and I do, you can pulse them in a blender or the food processor just to kind of break them up a little bit more. And that becomes the green materials for my compost bin. So that's the takeaway. Chop everything smaller than you would normally think to, and use what you can for your stock, and then the rest can just go into your green bin. Does that make sense? Now, when it comes to making the brown material smaller, one of the best things I ever did was buy a micro shredder, which I use to shred my brown material. So whether we're talking about cardboard boxes or brown paper bags or toilet paper rolls or parchment paper, whatever brown you're using, you do not want to put those in big strips in your compost bin, because you have to think of those little microscopic microorganisms, or even the little small macroorganisms. They're little. They have to work so hard to break all that down. So the easiest thing to do, the best thing to do for them to accelerate the composting process is to shred them. Actually, micro shred them. So you can get there's different kinds of shredders, and you can find them at Amazon. You can find my favorite over on my joyfulvegan.com/compost. there are two different types. There's like a strip cut shredder. Yeah, I totally geek out. I told you I was going to geek out. And then there's the micro shredder. If you have a strip cut shredder, it's better than not, than not shredding anything at all. But if you're looking for the best shredder for your brown materials, get a micro shredder. Okay. Because you don't want to put big chunks in. You want to have small, finely textured brown. The one that I have is a micro shredder. I think they come in like 8 sheets, like you can put 8 sheets of paper in, or 6 sheets. I think mine's a 6 sheet. And I can put cardboard boxes. I tear up the cardboard boxes. I stick them through. This is where I geek out, because this is where I actually really enjoy this process. And I've looked at blogs for other people who compost, and they also get really excited by this. I know, I told you, I warned you in the very beginning. If you're using leaves or other yard waste, I would also put them through some kind of shredder. It just speeds up the process. So that's what my recommendation is. And as far as getting those brown materials, I have asked friends and neighbors, give me your boxes, give me your newspapers. We obviously have toilet paper rolls, even though we're using the who gives a crap toilet paper. They still have a roll. Those toilet paper rolls get shredded up, and that goes into my compost. So talk to your friends and neighbors. My friend was over the other day because he brought me some boxes, and he says, "You're actually negative waste, because you're taking waste that your friends would actually just recycle, which is kind of waste, or throw away, and so you're actually taking their waste. So you're like negative waste." I love that idea. Until I can know for sure that I'm reducing it substantially, I'm not going to take credit for that. But you just basically tear off the boxes, the piece from the boxes, and you throw them through the micro shredder. So fantastic. It makes me very excited. The only problem is I'm looking at my office right now, and there's kind of a pile of boxes. So I have to find a system to keep it a little neater, because I don't like the boxes all around. First, you have to let your cats play in the boxes, and then you can shred them up. Okay, so that's our food. That's our food. And as I said, there's a guide for all of you supporters who you're going to get that guide for what you can put in the green, what you can put in your compost bin. The other component is air or oxygen. And the way you create oxygen is by mixing your compost pile, as I said, stirring it up, or tumbling your compost tumbler. So it's really easy with the EnviroCycle tumbler. You just rotate the drum. You do it every 3 or 4 days. Once it's full, this is what I was saying, and you want the microorganisms to just work on making your compost, then I would start using another bin. So rotating, mixing up, stirring up, that's what's actually going to create your oxygen. For the worm bins, by the way, you know who creates the oxygen in the worm bins? The worms. Because as they funnel through the soil and all the food and all the brown and green materials and start making the compost, they actually funnel through, and their little funnels actually create the oxygen. Water is the other one. You don't really have to worry about too much with the tumbler. If you have a big pile, you do want to keep it sprayed with some water to keep the moisture in, especially if it's in the sun. But you don't really have to do that with the tumbler bins, so you don't have to worry about that. But those are the 3 things through 3 components: the food, the oxygen, and the moisture. And I will say that keeping the balance is really key, because one of the mistakes that people make when they're composting is they will find that it's too wet. That's one of the real problems when you're composting, but you can easily rectify it by adding more brown, by adding drier ingredients. Now, as you start to get obsessed like me, you can get a compost thermometer. So I also have that at joyfulvegan.com/compost. And you can feel if it's warm when you open the tumbler. But really, if you want to really get a sense of how well you're doing, a thermometer, it's like $20, will really help. And you can see how active the microbes are, because you really want it to warm up. And if it's too wet, they can't do their work. If it's too dry, they can't do their work. So you really want to strike a balance. And you just strike that balance by making sure that you always put in 2/3 brown, 1/3 green. 2/3 brown, 1/3 green. Okay? That's the easiest way to think about it. If you start looking online, you're going to be overwhelmed. There's a million different, calculations out there, and it's just complicated. But honestly, if every time you add to the compost bin, you add green, make sure you add twice the amount of brown. It's kind of just maybe one way to think about it. What I have started doing, which I I'm loving. So I have a system. That pail I mentioned, that little stainless steel pail, which is also at joyfulvegan.com/compost, that pail sits on my counter. I used to just throw everything into that pail. Like I said, big chunks, just had all this green and kind of got, the stuff at the bottom started breaking down. It would smell. It was just overflowing. It was messy. I'm telling you, I've had fails. So what we do now is this. So exciting. That shredded brown that I mentioned, all of that shredded brown cardboard. So what I do, my system, is I put a little, pile of it at the bottom of my pail. Always, that's how I start. If I've dumped my compost pail into the compost tumbler, I go back into the house. And the thing is, you don't even have to wash it as much because it doesn't smell. It's not all like it used to be gross. It can get really gross. This is the solution. You put some brown, like shredded brown at the bottom of your little pail. Then when I've got those, chopped up green things, green material, I'm getting tired, green material that you want to add to your compost bin, I just take the chopped up, because I don't go right out to the compost bin every time. And if you did, you're going to lose track of your brown and green ratio. So I put the chopped up green materials on top of that little bed of brown materials in my pail. And then I put, right, so that's 1/3, 2/3. So then I put twice the amount of the more shredded brown right on top. Close the lid, go about my day, recording podcasts and such. And then later on, I'm making dinner. Same thing. I've got some shreds some green that I want to put in my compost pail. Put them right on top of that shredded brown, and then I put some more brown right on top. So it's just really nice, and that way the ratio is already created for me before I even go to the tumbler. Because if you just keep doing it like ad hoc, it's not going to work as well. You're just going to lose track. That's all. So that's my system, and it works, and it's brilliant, and I'm happy with it. So I really recommend it. It also means less odor. It creates your ratio. It's fantastic. And then, like I said, you just turn it to get your oxygen through. And when your bin is full, I'd start another one, to be honest. So what if you don't want to compost personally? What if you didn't like all this advice and you think, nope, still not going to do it, but I still want to reduce my food waste? What are some things I can do? So this is for you. So first of all, reduce your food waste. Apply the principles in part 2. Number 2, donate your veggie scraps. There are some farmers markets, like some farmers at farmers markets, who actually take veggie scraps. There's some farmers markets who have like a designated, like, drop your veggie scraps off here. So you might be surprised. And you can just keep your weekly scraps, keep them in the refrigerator, and then weekly when you go to the farmer's market, you can bring it to them, or just reach out to different farmers. You might be surprised. When you go to the farmer's market, ask them if they will take your scraps. But you might also just start like looking on Craigslist, on Free Cycle, community gardens, garden centers, or neighbors and friends who maybe aren't generating as much green waste. I don't know, who would want your veggie scraps. Reach out to them and see if you can donate your veggie scraps. So that's another thing you can do. You can also, some people just, you can kind of bury it in your backyard. That's one way too. Kind of bury it and it'll eventually decompose. But you'd have to, if you generate as much as I do, you'd have a big pit of veggie scraps. I mentioned the curbside collection of food waste is increasing around the country. I'm obviously only speaking about the US here. Check your locality, wherever you are, check your municipality. But there is a wonderful link at joyfulvegan.com/compost that tells you where you can find out where there's either municipal green pickup or private, which is really cool. So there are some really innovative people who've started some businesses where they will pick up your food waste. Like your food scraps. I'm going to say food waste because it's not waste until you've actually thrown it in the garbage. It's scraps before then. So they will pick it up. And that link will have some of those. That link will also have the private pickup as well. For instance, in North Carolina, in the Asheville Triangle areas, there's a company. It's called, I think, compostnow.org. Is the website. There's in Washington D.C. there's Bootstrap Compost in is that in Boston? No. Compost Cab is in Washington, D.C. Bootstrap Compost is in Boston. And we're talking like $10 a week, which might sound high to you, but frankly, we spend probably that much on our green bin, maybe a little less. But this is the balance, right? You're saving money because you're applying all the food waste, reducing food waste principles. You're saving money there. You just are. If you're learning how to make sure you store your vegetables and fruits and produce properly, you're eating what you buy. You're not wasting money. Don't give me this. I don't want to spend $10 a week. And yet we're throwing all of this food out. We're throwing 40% of the food we bring into our homes into the garbage. So you might as well just throw that $10 a week into the garbage. Right? So don't do that. Apply the principles that I've given you in part 2 and save that money. And now your food scraps will go to be used for compost, and you pay a service to help you with that. So that link is at joyfulvegan.com/compost. Go check it out and take advantage of that. There's also something like there's anaerobic composting. There's a little device called a bokashi. And it basically ferments the vegetables and fruit using anaerobic composting. The thing is, it is good, but it starts breaking everything down. The problem is you still have to then compost it. You still have to put it somewhere. But that's another option as well. You've maybe heard of the bokashi. So that is composting. Remember I said in part 2 that if we're going to bring something into our home, into our lives, we need to take responsibility for it. I think that is one of the biggest paradigm shifts for me in this journey, that I've stopped seeing myself as a consumer of goods. I now see myself as an owner of goods. And I know that sounds strange because it might sound like a very small distinction to you. And I know for those of us who are animal advocates, we don't tend to use the word owner, especially if we're talking about animals. Of course we don't. And I stand by that. But thinking of myself as an owner of the things I do buy, vegetables, fruits, anything I buy, has changed the way I interact with the world and with the things that I buy. Even the words themselves have taken on a new meaning. When I think of being a consumer versus an owner, the word consume, the etymology even reflects this kind of temporary exploitative use of something, right? You consume something. The etymology it comes from a classical Latin word that means to destroy, to wear away, to kill in the legal use, to extinguish, to wear down, to exhaust, to devour, to use up, to swallow up, right? Consume, to waste, to squander. That Latin word consumere is built from the Latin word cum, meaning together, and sum, meaning to take. And so that's now what I think of when I think of being a consumer. It's about like taking. When I think of being an owner, I think of possessing it, of claiming it as mine and taking responsibility for it. In fact, to just further our etymology lesson, the word own, in the sense of possessing something, comes from the Old English word meaning to have. And I like that notion of having rather than taking. And I would say that's the foundation of the zero waste principles that have been dictating my decisions since I started this journey, that when I make the choice to buy something or bring something into my life or possess something, I'm making the choice to take full responsibility for it. If I decide to make it mine, I'm going to take care of it to the best of my ability and make sure that I preserve its value to the fullest extent, perhaps even converting it into something of greater value. If I'm unable to do that, then I'm just taking, then I'm just consuming. And that's not what I'm aiming to do. And that's why I get so excited about composting. It's about keeping as closed a loop as possible in my life and in my home. If I bring something into it, I'm going to make sure I value it, use it up for what it was created for, get as much value I can out of it, and repurpose it so it creates even more value if possible. So that is what my takeaway is. I'd love to hear yours. This is a journey. It's not about being perfect. Just like I always say, related to being vegan, don't do nothing because you can't do everything. Do something, anything. And the good news is there's so much we can do. I'd love to hear what you're doing. Go over to joyfulvegan.com. Leave a comment for today's episode. Please become a supporter. Don't forget to enter the giveaway for the EnviroCycle compost tumblers. Get one. If you don't win, still get one, even if it's expired. I've put the link up, so it's super easy. Thank you to all of the supporters for making this podcast possible, and thank you to EnviroCycle for the generous giveaway from my listeners. For the animals, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thank you for listening.